Hello everyone, and welcome to Spirit of Truth Church, Spirit of Truth Outreach. It's nice to have all of you here tonight as we go through part 2 of our talk on the Ark of the Covenant. I think you guys are going to find this interesting. We're going to trace the history as we go throughout the battles and the conquest period, and then into its eventual disappearance. Talking as well about some more of the relationships of the people to the Ark of the Covenant. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I'd like to start out this time by talking about the purpose of the Ark in the conquest. So Numbers 10:35 through 36 is instructive on the use of the Ark. It says this: "Whenever the Ark set out," Moses said, "rise up, Lord. May your enemies be scattered. May your foes flee before you. Whenever it came to rest," he said, "return, Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." So in other words, when the Ark would rise up, when it would go out from where it was going to be set, this was an indication of war. This was an indication that God was going to fight the battles on behalf of the Israelites with the Israelites. And when it comes to rest, the understanding was that God was going to be among the people. So again, these verses link Israel's conquests with the Lord's presence and the Ark. In other words, the Lord's going to act on their behalf. Now, in 1 Samuel 17:47, we find the following: "All those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." So again, the Ark is going to be present during the battles as a literal representation of this belief. And there's some other cool things about this as well. When they say the battle is the Lord's, it doesn't mean that the army of Israel won't necessarily have to partake in fighting. But it's not going to be because of their military strength they're going to win. It's not going to be because they're superior in weapons that they'll win. It's not going to be anything that can be attributed to them. It is literally going to be God, Yahweh, who is going to give them the victory. And that's the key thing to understand here. Now, let's take a look at the first battle. This is Joshua 6 through 8. "So Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said to them, 'Take up the Ark of the Covenant and have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets in front of the Ark of the Lord.' He said to the people, 'Move forward, march around the city, and have the armed troops go ahead of the Ark of the Lord.' After Joshua had spoken to the people, 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets before the Lord moved forward and blew the trumpets. The Ark of the Lord's covenant followed them." So what you have here, again, is no army. You've got the vanguard of the 7 trumpets. Then you have the Ark, the actual army here. So again, the Ark is representatives of the Lord's presence. You have that forward guard. The trumpets announce the army, which is the Ark of the Covenant. And you have a rear guard. Okay, the emphasis is on the Ark of the Lord as the literal presence. So God is literally going to come down and crush the enemy. God, or the Lord, is going to be the one to fight the battle, and this victory is already a given. It's a foregone conclusion, a done deal. Now we have to understand that the Israelites had never before conquered a walled city, and remember, they're coming from essentially fleeing from Egypt and wandering the desert. So this is the first real battle they're facing here. Okay, they didn't have the means to fight a war. They didn't have the methods to fight a battle. They didn't have the resources to fight a battle. Essentially, this is a siege that they had no possibility of winning. And the Jericho people, the Jerichites, knew that. So the only way they were going to win is if Yahweh fought the battle for them. So thus the procession around the city was really Yahweh, or the Lord, marching around the city. It was a religious ceremony, but it was also a ceremony of battle. So what happens then in Jericho is they march around the city, and at the last trumpet sound, the walls literally fall outward, forming a ramp into the city. Now, this has been confirmed via archaeological evidence that indeed the walls did fall outward, and you can see that, and then they went in and conquered the city. And in fact, there's even some other interesting archaeological evidence where it talks about how they weren't allowed to take any grain or anything because the city was placed under the Harem ban, that what actually happens in the archaeological record is there's actually burned grain and burned food there as well. I mean, you could see it in the archaeological record, which is very, very exciting to see that much confirmation. Okay, now what happens then? So again, they win. Ark goes around, they win, no problem. But what now happens at Ai? A little different. Joshua 7, 2 through 4. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Aven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, "Go up and spy out the region." So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, "Not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there." So about 3,000 men went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai. Now, the question is why? Well, in the text we know it's because someone indeed took from Jericho and kept it for his own. So what happens after this defeat? Joshua's unaware of what went down, so Joshua mourns before the ark. This is Joshua 7, 6 through 9. Again, ark is the literal presence of God. Joshua mourns before God. The ark also was absent from the battle of Ai. Thus the presence of the Lord did not go before them in this battle. So what do they have to do? Well, they find out that there is one among them who has held something that was Corban, or that was on the ban. Okay, that was held for the ban. And what it is they find out that it was Achan of the tribe of Judah who kept items devoted for God and devoted for destruction for himself. This was after the Battle of Jericho. So Achan is then stoned after his sins revealed and confessed. Had he not been, the whole of Israel would have been convicted guilty and destroyed. Again, this is very important to understand the covenantal link of Israel. One sins, it's as if the whole group sins. You cannot have impurity in that covenant community. So they have to do a covenant renewal after then the victory at Ai. And this is carried out in front of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord as it was being carried by the priests. And again, the Ark is symbolizing God's presence. Now, what about some other battles? Well, let's go ahead and read Numbers 14:44 through 45. Nevertheless, in their presumption, they went up toward the highest point in the hill country, though neither Moses nor the Ark of the Lord's covenant moved from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and attacked them and beat them down all the way to Hormah. So in this situation, God did not instruct them to go and fight. He did not go and instruct them to go and do battle. We don't know. It says in their presumption. This could possibly be in a warmongering state, and a presumption, we're just the best and we're just going to go and do this. It could be a prideful state is what it sounds like as well. But there could be multiple motivations that they were under the influence of in their presumption. And so Israel disobeyed, and they were immediately punished. Okay? So they tried to obey, but maybe in their own timing. Okay? There's a lack of presence of the ark, which is going to lead immediately to defeat. Now, in the ancient times, when nations would go to war, the gods of nations also went to war. And there's a legitimate concern with this, because Yahweh is called Israel his people, and if they were destroyed, it'd be understood by the nations to be a failure of Yahweh himself. Okay? So you have things in the Egypt, you have the desert, you have the failure in battle, failure to fulfill the promise of the conquest of the promised land. There's a lot of situations going on here, okay? A lot of situations. What's going to happen? Is God really there? Well, we have to understand is that God does not act like the other gods, where it's like, it'd just be an automatic win, and that's the only thing the God's ever going to bring unless there's a stronger God. The God of Israel said, no, if you act in my law, I will bless you. If you act against my law, I will curse you. So God is going to do something specific after a punishment of Israel to demonstrate his grace and restoration, because he doesn't also want to mar his witness just because Israel is being disobedient. So in other words, he's going to restore Israel, restore it through grace and restoration, and then that will be a demonstration of who he is to nations. So, for example, other battles, Joshua 10, 9 through 15, it talks about the Israelites routing the Amorites. But again, what happened to the Amorites? Well, hail fell on them as they fled from the battle. Now, the ark isn't mentioned, but it surely would have been present. Joshua 22:13, Israel gathers at Shiloh, which is the home of the ark at this point, in reaction to the building of the altar at Gileath by the tribes of Gad and Reuben. Now, this was seen as a covenant violation. The second you try to build an altar for God, other than the altar where the ark would be, or other than the place the ark would be, that's a covenant violation, okay, or at least a potential one. And because you worship God through the ark alone at one place. You don't divide the worship of Yahweh in the Old Testament, because that would divide the nations of Israel. And so you've got to keep Israel as one, and thus worship is at one place. This is why when you have the divided monarchy, all of a sudden things split, and now you have two places of worship, although they made one there because they didn't want to go to Jerusalem. But again, division in the tribes is a result of splitting the worship of God. It's banned. Now, what about the abuses of the ark? Well, abuse of the ark in 1 Samuel. So this is the battle against the Philistines. This is 1 Samuel 4, 3 through 5. It says the following. When the troops returned to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord let us be defeated today by the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord, or the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh. Then it will go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies." So the people sent men to Shiloh to bring back the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts who dwells between the cherubim. Now, what's right off the bat, what's the problem with this? Well, immediately you can see. They're trying to force God's hand, right? They're trying to use the ark as this sort of object of power, right? Trying to force his hand for a victory. In other words, what they're doing is they're dissociating God's decree to call a victory from his ark. That's not going to go well. Okay, there's an acknowledgement that the Lord himself dwells beneath the angelic figures, but note what they say. They acknowledge that. So in other words, they believe that they're going to command God or force God's hand in this situation. Very, very dangerous. So what is the result? It's not simple defeat. Okay, Israel went from 4,000 dead people to another 30,000 dead people. 2 priests were killed and the ark is taken. So you don't force God's hand. You let him do what he's going to do. You don't try to make it happen, as they did. So what happens? Well, the Israelites, again, in this case, were defeated by the Philistines. As I said, verse 3, the elders acknowledged that the Lord brought the defeat, and they proposed to bring the ark to battle. As I said, Philistines feared the ark. They understood even that it represented the presence of the Hebrew God, but the loss of the ark signaled Israel's second greater defeat in the battle. So, what about 1 Samuel 5, 2 through 12? So in other words, the Philistines have the ark. Yay, Philistines have the ark. Maybe not. Okay, so now they have the ark in their temple with the idol of Dagon there, the fish god. And essentially what's going to happen is the idol of Dagon is going to be destroyed by Yahweh through the ark. Again, this is actually another battle. And it would have been seen that way between the two, quote, gods, right? You have the true God and you have the false God. And essentially this. What is happening? So that this idol of Dagon is being taken out. Well, first it falls. Okay, it's going to fall over, right? So it's going to fall. Yahweh was not defeated. This is what it's signifying. Yahweh's not defeated. Yahweh's not inferior. Yahweh's not subordinate or about to suffer humiliation. Okay, again, after capture, kings and other gods would often be subject to humiliation, and Yahweh's like, no, that's not happening here. So why cut off the head then? Well, that meant that the god or king was dead. Heads were often displayed as a confirmation of death. Now, the cutting off the hands was a way to count casualties after a battle. And the general mutilation of that idol showed that the false god was powerless. So you have a total and utter defeat of the Philistine religion, and not only that, the Philistines would be freaking out at this point, because if that thing is, if the ark has basically just destroyed their god, what is it going to do to them? I mean, that's some serious, serious stuff. So then we move to 2 Samuel 11, and this is essentially the season. Now we're in the time of David. This is the season when kings generally led their armies into battle. Okay, this is what's kind of being depicted here. And the Israelites brought the ark with them. Good job. But David didn't follow the ark into battle, as was his place. So what happens? Well, this is where he falls into the sin of adultery and murder. He should have been out fighting the wars. He wasn't in his place, and thus he fell into sin. So again, there's this thing where it's like, if the king's not with the ark, the king should always be with the ark. If he's not with the ark, he's in disobedience in general. Then we have this other situation about the ark and the destruction of the tribe of Benjamin. So at this point, the Ark of the Covenant was in Bethel. The ark should be in the innermost room and serve as the representation of the throne of God. Normally, the ark is in Shiloh. But again, the removal of the ark, or the Lord's authority, could be potentially interpreted as a result of the defection of Benjamin. But the Israelites had brought the ark with them in their conquest, and also in the battle against Benjamin. They knew that if they had the ark, God would be with them. This is also, by the way, how they inquired of God. The ark was with the direction or command of God would ensure victory. And so as a result, they go and destroy the Benjamites for their sin. Now, let's take a look at the ark at Shiloh. So located in the center of the tribal allotment west of the Jordan River, the modern archaeological site is Kirbet Siloon, and it is the Middle Bronze Age to Late Bronze Age occupation. Iron Age 1 ruins are in alignment with the destruction by the Philistines at the time of the capture of the ark. That's kind of cool. And its destruction seems to have been by fire, and the sanctuary where it stood has not been found. Now, at this point, there'd be the tent of meeting or tabernacle being established in Shiloh. This is going to be the residence of the Ark of the Covenant, 1 Samuel 3:3 for reference, until the improper use against the Philistines, after which the Ark is taken and Shiloh is destroyed. Now, it's called the tent of meeting because this is where Israel would essentially meet with God. It's important in establishing and unifying religion and institution in the Promised Land. The land is under control of Yahweh, but it's not assigned yet. So the placement of the Ark at Shiloh would last for approximately 300 years. Then you have it being moved to the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. Okay, the Ark was representative of God's reign over the Promised Land. So much like a king, during the initial engagements, the king rides out to conquer the land, but then at the moment that the king or Ark here returns to the throne or temple, this means that the authority of the king or God is established over the dominion or the reign and the land. And the point at this point is the Ark's not meant to leave the temple. At this point, you shouldn't have to be fighting wars. At this point, there should be peace. However, they might have to fight wars and fight battles if, for example, they're being disobedient and now is punishment from God. So that's a little bit of the story of the Ark. I'll go ahead and read now for you 1 Kings 8:44 through 45. When your people go out to fight against their enemies, wherever you send them, and they pray to Yahweh in the direction of the city you have chosen, in the temple I have built for your name, you may hear their prayer and petition in heaven and uphold their cause. So even when they were fighting these minor battles, the Ark wouldn't necessarily leave. It wasn't a full-scale war, but they would pray in the direction of the temple or in the direction of the Ark. Again, the victory would be linked to Yahweh, and prayer and human petition are the human cause of that victory. So that's essentially what you're seeing here, is the Ark becomes a focal point. It becomes the point at which they look when they're praying to God. It becomes their victory in battle. The Ark is central to ancient Israelite religion and life and politics. Now, what about this interesting notion of inquiring of the Lord or casting lots? So in Joshua 21, the family heads of the Levites are going to call for the land promised to them, and lots are cast to determine where their inheritance would be. So it's possible, again, that the casting of lots was done at the location of the Ark, as often communication came to Israel through the Ark. And so we're seeing that this is the meeting place of God. It's where God's going to commune with mankind. Now, in Judges 20:27, the Benjamites sinned by abusing a Levite woman in the night. And so the Israelite army inquired of the Lord at the Ark of the Covenant about whether to go into battle against the Benjamites. Okay, so God again is directing and guiding his people through communication via the Ark. And consequences of covenant breaking. So what happens when covenant's broken? Well, 1 Samuel 2:12, you have the sons of Eli are being corrupt. And this corruption in the handling of sacrifices was done in Shiloh in the presence of the Ark and God. So you're talking about directly breaking the covenant right in God's face. 1 Samuel 2:25, there's temple prostitution at the tent of meeting, which is a sin against the Lord. Again, the Ark is present. Now, what is this indicative of? It's not just the sin there. This is indicative of corruption throughout the land and led directly to the next incident. So, again, you're talking about the Ark of the Lord, and priests are acting corruptly. What does that say about everybody else? No one else is coming up and saying, hey, stop that. You stop that or we're waging war against you on behalf of the Lord. You know, the priest class. We'll replace you all if we need to. No, that wasn't happening. They were accepting these things. This is part of the problem. So what's the proper response to God through the Ark? Well, 2 Chronicles 6:24 through 25 says this. If your people, Israel, are defeated before an enemy because they have sinned against you. Note, there's a direct link. You sin, you're going to be defeated. And they return to you and praise your name. And they pray and plead for mercy before you in this temple. May you hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your people, Israel. May you restore them to the land you gave them and their ancestors. So again, there's a connection between the temple and the Ark and the land and their victory in battles. Pray toward the temple is a direct connection to praying toward the Ark, where God meets people. And this continues, as I said, that punishment grace motif that you're going to see, where there's always, if there's a punishment, there's always a restoration to be had as well. And so again, that's the proper response, is to repent. Now, that's kind of what I wanted to share, a nice little 20-minute lecture, but I want to mention a couple other things. First, there's this book, phenomenal book on the Ark by Randall Price. I love it. Title is Searching for the Ark of the Covenant. It's a really solid book about the Ark and its history and modern day understanding of the Ark and things like that. It's been a lot of fun to just get to read through that and some of these other sources I used to compile this talk. But the other thing I want to say is this, is when we look at the ark really gives us an understanding, and these are just some of my final thoughts, and I'll look for questions as well here in a moment. The ark really gives a sense of holiness. It gives a sense of what God's holy presence on earth really looks like. You cannot defile it. You cannot go against the covenant. You cannot mistreat it. You cannot abuse it. You can't do things wrong in front of it. It truly is holy. God's presence makes it holy. He is there. And I think that's one of the main things we can learn from the ark, is a reverence and awe for the majesty, glory, power, and honor of God, and the honor that's due God for who he is and what he's done. And so let's go ahead now and take a look and see if there are any questions. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. I don't see any. So we'll go ahead and close it there. I'll go ahead and open a Zoom channel. If people do want to talk more about the ark or archaeology in general, I'd love to do so. I'll go ahead and paste that in here in a second. Give me 1 second to start it, and then we'll go ahead and paste it in. All right, here we go. Invite. All right, so you can go ahead and join via that link if you'd like to, and we can have a nice little discussion. I'll wait just a moment and see if anybody joins here, and then I'll go ahead and sign off. But yes, again, that was the talk on the search for the Ark of the Covenant. We've got some exciting ones coming up soon. I think we've got a number of good ones cooking in the pot right now, so I'm looking forward to getting to go through some of those with you. Next Thursday, we're going to be doing our next talk on discipleship, and we'll continue on from there. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us here at Spirit of Truth Church, Spirit of Truth Outreach, for this talk on the Ark of the Covenant Cleaning House. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.